If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right.
Hi there. Today we're going to delve into a topic that touches nearly every aspect of our lives. We've talked about the fables of work, and specifically today we're going to talk about the concept of working hard. Now, I've talked about this concept previously in another Fables of Work episode, but I want to extend on that. My goal this morning is to help us challenge some assumptions and mental models that we probably hold currently. And those are mental models about what it means to work hard and hard work's role in achieving success or any goal that we might have. Almost everybody talks about working hard. Aspirational people talk about it, successful people talk about it. Parents typically try to teach it to their children. It's really common advice, and it's recognized as both a sine qua non of success and as a moral virtue. Now, I do think this is wise advice, but I think it probably needs more nuance to avoid adopting the wrong mindset. The value of this discussion for you, I believe, is significant. In a world that often glorifies a single intense path to success, understanding that there are multiple definitions of success and different flavors of hard work can be incredibly liberating and empowering. It will certainly help us critically evaluate the hard work idea and particularly the brute force method. And I'll explain what that is in a little bit. You probably get it just from the way I described it. So we'll want to consider what kind of pain or challenge you might be best suited to deal with, and ultimately navigate your own career and life choices with greater clarity and greater purpose. By the end of this talk, I hope you'll have a more nuanced understanding of hard work and how it applies to our own aspirations. We often hear narratives from successful people. A story comes to mind from Cal Newport, who made this story visible to me, a young man named Emil Barr. And Emil's claim is generally that sacrificing your life is the only way to build a successful business. So his own approach, this is Emil Barr, not Cal, of course. Emil Barr's extreme approach involves working 12.5 hours a day, 12 and a half hours a day, 7 days a week. He claims he sleeps only 3.5 hours a night. And he also says that he's built two companies with a combined worth of over $20 million. He follows that up by, boldly stating his goal of reaching $1 billion in net worth by the age of 30. And at that point, he plans to get out of business and start, quote, helping people, quote. Now, this is one version of this story, but it's not the only one. There are a lot of people who think in similar ways, and many more of us who believe that that's true without ever going public with it. I refer to this kind of thinking as the hustle culture. And in particular, the Emil Barr strategy For our purposes, I'm going to refer to that as the example of the brute force method. Okay. Now, when we look, the first thing we need to do is we need to think about what we mean by success. And I'm not going to drill down into all the different pieces of that because other people have already done it and they've done it pretty well. But I would say, when we look at success, I think there's kind of two big picture ways to look at it. So I'm going to say there's this intense, loud success, and there's this fairly quiet success. Okay. Now, success, certainly, I think it would be beyond the scope of this to talk about success in many ways other than a successful life, a successful career. This is not to say that that's the only model of success, but it's the only one we're going to deal with today. So the assumption is about having a career and making money. Okay, now that's not my global approach. I certainly don't think money is the be all and end all of human existence. But for this purpose, let's talk about it from that perspective. So there's kind of two ways to do it, two ways to view success. And one is this startling young person prodigy, flashy kind of business success or career success, right? And it definitely seems to, at least, require this intense single-minded devotion. And I think that that's not a horrible model in terms of its accuracy. I think the fundamental problem is that most of us believe that it is the only way or the surest way or the majority of what we do has to be this, extreme devotion to the intense struggle of creating something in our lives. And certainly, I think there are fields where this is true. I think we sort of get this overall model maybe from the fields where it is true. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but just to preview that a little bit, I think so many of us view our model of success is athletes. And I do think that it's true that in athletics, we see the majority of successful people do have this early and intense devotion to becoming successful in their field of endeavor. Now, I think in athletics, certainly the human factor comes into play. It's well known that as we age, most athletics become much more difficult to us. And so if you're going to be, a professional athlete, then you're probably best expected to do that by, your mid to late 20s. Okay? If you're not already, on some sort of trajectory by then you're simply going to run out of time. Because, most professional athletes are not still playing when they're 40. There are a few outliers, and congratulations to them, but most of them are not. And so there is this window of time where if that's your goal, then you really need to, make it very quickly. Okay. Um, Even there, though, people do strive for work-life balance. And an example is the golfer Scotty Scheffler, who's the number one golfer in the world and seems to be on this spectacular career trajectory, but he openly talks about the fact that he guards his private life. And I don't mean from paparazzi particularly, but that he manages his career in such a way that he feels like he's got plenty of time with his family and for other pursuits. So that's one model, this extreme devotion idea. The other model is kind of quiet model. Okay. And I would say this is leans more towards a definition of success than towards some uh, process to achieve it. Okay. And so the quiet life model is, there's many people who want their goal and their definition of success is to be comfortable. Now, the definition of comfortable varies wildly. Okay. And many people who claim, well, I just want to be comfortable, put a tag on that that's just extraordinarily high. And they say, well, I just want to be comfortable, but as a humility move or something like that. And they're fooling themselves a little bit, but there is variation in what comfortable means. A lot of times it has to do with where you live. A lot of times it has to do with how you were brought up. But there are different numbers. But a billion is kind of outside of anybody's definition, I think, of comfortable. I may be wrong, but it's really out there on one end of the distribution. So there's a lot of people that just want, stability in their lives. Okay. Financial stability, let's buy a house that we're comfortable in. It doesn't have to be extravagant, you know. And we heard about this some time ago when a book was written called The Millionaire Next Door. And the theme of the book was and this was, I don't know, probably 30 years ago or more. And the theme of the book was, at the time, $1 million was a lot of money. It still is, but it was more a lot of money then than it is now. And the theme of the book was, millionaires don't have to be, flashy, famous people. If you look at some of the folks in your neighborhood, they probably have $1 million in net worth. Between the house and a retirement fund and salary accumulation and all these different sorts of things. They may have a vacation house, a hunting lodge, And the point being that these are quiet people. And so when we see this perspective, okay, it's certainly supported by spiritual teachings and wisdom literature. In particular, as a Christian, I read the Bible and it says, seek to lead a quiet life. It says, do your work. It says, earn your wages and then seek to live a quiet life. And so when we look at that, the example that pops into my head is, the family dentist model. Okay. And so I don't know how grueling the training is for a dentist, but I presume that it's not the same as for, say, a surgeon or, this intense residency that medical professionals put themselves through for reasons that I'm unsure about. But somebody with a thriving dental practice can, earn, $250,000, three, 400,000, and that's a very comfortable life in most parts of the country. And I think a lot of people desire this because while avoiding the passion hypothesis, okay, most people just want to contribute to the world and to help other people in the world. And I think that's the root of our satisfaction in the world is that, we desire to be needed. We desire to be relied on. And I think maybe the brute force method is more about, I'm going to do something I hate so that then I can not have to do anything. Now, I do think that there's significant evidence that, people who wind up with nothing to do, do nothing. Okay. There's stories abound of people who, retire and at a fairly young age and really don't have much else to do, and it just, it crumbles them. We don't see that picture very often because we're inundated by, spry 70-year-olds who are playing pickleball in Lululemon clothes and drinking, sports drinks on the TV. If that's you, I don't mean to offend you. I just mean, you know, the ads paint a particular picture. And so we then look into this and we say, okay, well, if you're successful, if you've achieved your dreams by the time you're 30, and perhaps these people have some other dreams as well, but why, if you have another dream, then why are you pausing for this one? So there's this whole kind of thinking about, okay, well, what's the end goal? And I really think that most of the time, the difference between the two approaches is simply one of impatience. And, just to make the point, I think our culture glorifies impatience. I don't know if it always has, but it certainly does now. And the wisdom literature, the Bible that I'm most aware of, but all wisdom literature talks about, practice patience, you know, practice uh, being careful about your desires, practice willpower. And we know that in human thriving, one of the most thorough predictors of thriving is delayed gratification. And so I think rewarding and pursuing that impatience, I think it's pretty harmful. Okay. So now, I believe in a calm productivity method. I believe in getting things done in the world. It's very important to me that I do things out in the world. It's very important to me that I give things to people that help them. And in that vein, if this is kind of an idea that you'd like to explore more, if you want to look into productivity or the mindsets around productivity, I'd consider it an honor if you'd reach out to me and let's have a conversation about it. I may be able to help you, or I may be able to point you in some direction where you can find somebody that suits your needs. And so it would be an honor for me to be able to help you figure out what's going on there. So reach out to me if you'd like. You can find me at larry@dobusywrite.com. So now, as we move on with our topic, we look at hard work, and I think it's important to take this apart a little bit because the term hard work is really ambiguous, and it can mean a lot of different things, even in our own heads. It can mean a lot of different things. But then we seem to lump all those things together and say, oh, well, hard work is important and hard work is the key to success, without then breaking it out and detailing what we're talking about. Okay. So when we have this, I'll say, unclear mindset about hard work, the downside is that as knowledge workers, we cannot consistently do our best work while we're carrying the additional cognitive load of stress, exhaustion, right? If you're doing a physical job, then the mental load you carry doesn't have as much direct impact on your physical. It has some, don't get me wrong. And at the highest peak of athletics, mental approach is very important and they work very hard on it. But if you need to, lay another 100 bricks before you quit for the day. Okay, that's your body getting tired. Maybe you can refuel. Maybe you can take a quick break. Physical, and so it's just a little bit different how your physical body reacts to cognitive load and how your mental work reacts to cognitive load. Okay, so I think this is really important as we embrace our roles as knowledge workers and understand how to perform them, that this mental cognitive load really sucks up our resource that makes us valuable. It utilizes our productive asset in ways that don't help us. And so I think that's important. And if we have the wrong mindset, then I think we're gonna succumb to that challenge of having too much on our minds so that we can't perform our mental labor the way we need to. And then I want to be very, very clear about what I'm not saying. Okay? I am not saying that work should always be easy. That's simply not true. Useful results and valuable work are challenging to produce by definition. We also have limits to both our cognitive energy and to our willpower. Now, we sometimes don't view non-physical work as depleting when we talk about energy. But I can tell a great difference in days when I've been in front of people a lot for the day and days when I've not been. And I can also tell a huge in my resulting energy level. I can also tell a huge difference between mentally draining tasks performed at my desk and less draining tasks also performed at my desk. And so the consumption of energy by your brain is a real thing. Okay. Your brain consumes 20% of the calories that you take in anyway. And that's just in normal cognitive mode. Okay. If you're really thinking hard, my anecdotal evidence is it consumes more. We talk about your attention as a spotlight, and you make it brighter. And when you make it brighter, just like a spotlight, it consumes more electricity. Okay. Well, when we make ours brighter, it consumes more glucose in our brain cells. And that really, if you do some hard cognitive work, you can begin to understand and feel what that looks like. So, again, I'm not saying that work should always be easy, but I am saying that we have a misunderstanding of what hard means when we talk about hard work. Because if nothing else, we learned the opposite in school. We learned the opposite of this depleting mental model. Because in school, we learned a subset of hard work that was basically defined as study until you drop. If you want to be a good student, you got to study. There's no limit to the studying. Study all the time. Stay up late and cram for the test. Well, it doesn't work. And we know this, but that's still right. So that's this hard work mentality. Okay. It's hard to do cognitive stuff at the end of a 14 or 16-hour day. It's just hard. And so all of that to say we all have this model, but I'm not saying that work should always be easy and that if it becomes hard by any of the definitions we're about to talk about, if it becomes hard, you should just give up. That's the wrong approach. There are other approaches than just brute forcing through it, but we can get into that in another episode. So when we look at hard work, I'm going to suggest that we, at least for now, divide it into 4 distinct flavors of hard work. And we're going to do this, and then that's going to show us some things about maybe where we should apply our own strengths and weaknesses to moving in the direction of work that suits us very well. So we'll talk about all that. So The first flavor of hard work, I think, is the most in line with the brute force definition, and that is physically demanding and dangerous work. Okay, where our bodies are actually potentially subjected to pain. Okay, so that's many kinds of athletics are this way. Certainly, um, first responder kind of jobs, paramedics, firefighters, police, sometimes are faced with this situation. Um, you know, active military in really any branch is physically demanding and dangerous work. And even athletics, right? There's a certain amount of physical pain that just comes along with it, in addition to the risk of injury. Sometimes career-ending injury is prominent in many sports. Football comes to mind for sure, on this front, but many uh, athletes are on an edge of physical performance, whatever their sport is, that they could have an injury that really hampers them, if not directly eliminates them from pursuing their career. And so that's one flavor of hard work, and that's the one that most lines up with the brute force method in my mind. Okay. And that's really maybe where we got the model. Okay. Now, the second one is this Emil Barr version of brute force. Okay, which is I don't do physical work, I do mental work, but I'm going to do it, you know, 12-hour days, 7 days a week. And what makes this work hard is the sheer volume and duration of effort, mental effort. It also makes it what also makes it hard is not having the other things that make a human life rich. Okay, for example, if you're Emil Barr, one of the things he talks about is like, no, I don't have any relationships. Well, okay. His view is obviously that he can build relationships when he's rich. Well, many people, okay, really don't have that option. If you're a married person, some people are able to pull off making an agreement that allows one of the spouses to go on this brute force expedition. Military families talk about how difficult it is to sustain uh, a relationship under those conditions. And so, one of the fundamental problems here is you not only potentially damage yourself, and maybe you're tough enough to pull this off, but you certainly potentially damage the people around you by your absence. And this is this, you know, we're the getter doners, the up all nighters, the right, and we're just workers. And it's like, now, um, this thing is a form of this, white knuckle gritted teeth approach that we often get from our image of athletics. And, white knuckling gritted teeth is sometimes required, right? But it's far, far away from a model that has been shown to work in any sort of mental capacity or knowledge work, right? You can't brute force a new idea. You can't brute force a solution to a problem. And so, that's where this thing is really the most common brute force model among people, knowledge workers. Okay. And they go, oh, I'm going to do knowledge work for this period of time. I don't think we have that capacity as humans. And I have some experience here because at one point, very early in my career, I worked at a laboratory, a testing laboratory, and it was a very small company, and there were really just two of us working there, and we had these certification tests that we had to pass annually. And while we had about 6 weeks to do the test, from the time we got the samples to the time we had to turn in the results, we usually procrastinated and tried to do it in 2 weeks, which meant for 2 weeks every year. I worked there for 3 years, I think. Uh, every year for that period of time, there were 2 weeks when I would actually come home every other night because I was working these 36-hour shifts because we had to keep the test moving because we were facing a deadline. And so, I've experienced something of this, and in some ways, it's like the effects of alcohol, right? So people will say, well, the first thing you lose when you drink is any sort of reasonable sense of whether or not you're drunk. Okay. And I'm going to say the first thing you lose when, you're beginning to feel this mental exhaustion is the sense of how much is slowing you down. And so anyway, so just to show you that I've got some experience here, and in project management and in programming stuff, there have been some heroic efforts as well. It's not something that I've been willing to do for the past 20 years, and I think there's a little bit of hero culture in the programming world as well, a little brute force. So anyway, so that's the two that I think are really, kind of this. One is the athletics where I think we get the brute force model. And two is when we bring that over to knowledge work, okay, it's the brute force model there, right? So physically demanding and dangerous work, and then this brute force method around non-physically challenging or dangerous work. The third kind, I'm going to say, is cognitively hard work. Now, this type of work involves creating new knowledge, solving complex problems with no clear answers, and constantly pushing intellectual boundaries. Uh, Here's where a lot of computer programmers are, creators, people who make things in the world, inventing new concepts, real thought leaders, people that create not only new physical artifacts like computer programs or art, but also people who create new ideas, create new knowledge. Okay. And it's hard because it requires continuous learning and keeping up with advancements and this mental exertion of finding novel solutions to problems. And it's hard in the way that potentially practicing your musical instrument is hard. It's hard in the sense of, well, uh, I'm not ready to do that yet, in the sense of that would be better done later, as compared to procrastination of physical task, which tends to be, oh, I'm tired, right? So doing all of those activities I mentioned, learning is really cognitively difficult, in part because it's frustrating, right? I mean, you haven't learned until you've learned, and between the time you start learning and the time you have learned is this sense of consistent failure, right? Um, so yeah, a lot of people find this sort of thing highly stressful, and they don't like to do it, particularly learning. And maybe I'm the weird duck because I enjoy doing it. Now, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but that's going to lead to a point that I'm going to bring up later as we look at hard work and what it means in our lives. So that's the third example, right? Top-notch musicians, top-notch chess players, bridge players, poker players, right? All of these people are in this cognitively demanding work. Sometimes medical professionals are in this, certainly researchers, right? But it's the kind of work that never really falls back into autopilot mode mentally. So that's the third kind, is cognitively hard work. And then a fourth kind is, I refer to it as emotionally hard work. So this involves navigating emotionally charged situations, like those found in leadership roles, but also, you know, therapists and other people in helping professions, or other people who try to help others sort out their problems. But the challenge here is this patience and this intense listening, and further, this empathy that has to be deployed as we're understanding another human being's situation and potentially understanding the pain that they're going through. Counselors and people like that. Dealing with other human beings, especially when they're in difficult circumstances, mentally, emotionally, or otherwise, is inherently emotionally hard. It can also be cognitively hard, but it's definitely emotionally hard. A friend of mine is a MD and has a family practice, but she also spends a bunch of time as a hospitalist. I was not familiar with the term hospitalist, but a hospitalist is somebody who does rounds at the hospital. So it's sort of a staff doctor at the hospital. And so it's one thing to be in family practice where you get to kind of know your patients and you're dealing with stuff that is at a certain level challenging, but then for the real, dramatic cases, any family general practitioner is going to immediately ship you to the emergency room. And so this mid-level of diagnostic and those kinds of work. But then a hospitalist, right? That's very different, because you're dealing with people who are in pain. They're in a place they don't want to be for reasons that they don't want to be there. That is the hospital. Even people who are, potentially facing their own death. And she does this, and she talks about occasions where she's, had patients under her care pass away and having to approach the families and explain what happened. And, other times when she's had to walk into a room and explain to an individual that they have this, most likely incurable, deadly physical challenge or disease in their life. And that's this emotionally hard work. And I think it's something that many of us tend to avoid whenever we can. And this is a whole different kind of hard to me than cognitively hard. And so when we look at this emotionally hard work, right, this is therapists and clinicians and psychiatrists or psychologists and teachers, leaders who have to get in with somebody else and explain to them, hey, let me help you with these emotional areas of your life. Now, I will say, as usual, there's a fifth kind that doesn't fall neatly into one of the four categories. Unfortunately, that's the way my mental models often work. I'll say grit and persistence are underneath. They're a foundation for all four of these sorts of things. Okay, so regardless of the flavor of hard, in a career, you wind up facing that same flavor of hard over and over again. And performance under any flavor of hard is persistence. Okay. And so grit and persistence, willpower, and I'm not talking about the gritted teeth kind. I'm just talking about, hey, I'm willing to move along consistently. Grit and persistence, right, is underneath of that. Now, one of the results that I promised you was when we break down this model of hard work, and I'm going to say, just as a shorthand, I'm going to say the four different kinds of pain that we face in the four different kinds of hard work. So it's physical. Okay, I'm going to say it's relational or challenge of the brute force knowledge work, and that actually makes the work harder. In my mind, it's very clear that when you're under stress, you don't do your best knowledge work. Okay, so I'm going to say, for the second one, I'm going to say stress and relationship pain. Okay. The third one is cognitively hard. So we face this cognitive pain, this draining of our cognitive resources. That's a real thing. And the need to stop then and recharge that cognitive. I don't think we have very clear limits on what that is. In other words, we all have a general sense of what would exhaust a standard human physically. But I'm not sure that we know much about what would exhaust a standard human mentally, or any clean way to measure that, because it's certainly not hours worked in most cases. But anyway, so, and then emotional pain, right? Living in somebody else's emotional trauma, having that empathy is a challenge. And people that do this kind of work will tell you, well, they kind of bring the problems home with them. It's almost in empathy, we almost have to adopt that same worldview as the person that we're trying to help. And so that's emotionally hard and emotionally draining. At the end of the day, I believe that we're individually built to deal effectively with one of these kinds of pain. And again, I'm using pain metaphorically, except in the case of physical. And I think that as we begin to understand ourselves, it's not that maybe we don't feel the pain, it's just that we feel it less. We're able to put it aside more easily. We're able to, just I don't mean anesthetize ourselves to the pain, but just naturally. And I admire people that are able to do the physical things and face that physical pain. People that train for and run marathons, for example. It's like, wow, that's got to hurt. And it's been described that, and I forget who said this, I'm sorry, marathon runners have to find a place to put that pain and boredom of running. They have to put it in a closet, lock it away, because if they focus on it, they won't finish. And that's really kind of an interesting approach. But each of us then can choose. And it requires some experience to understand, because you have to go feel the different kinds of, again, air quotes, pain, in order to see which one best suits you. Okay. I mean, we're all going to deal with some sort of, and this notion of pain. Okay, we're all going to face some challenges, and we're all going to face challenges of all four kinds. But when we select our work, I think we can find that there's one that, just doesn't feel quite as bad. One that I can deal with. And in my own case, it's this cognitive learning thing. Okay. I can do emotional, but it really is draining to me and puzzling to me. Physical, I've never been particularly good at. I mean, I was okay when I was in high school, but never been particularly good at putting up with that kind of pain. And then certainly the relationship pain of the brute force method is not something I'm willing to risk, because I have relationships in my life that people would be damaged if I didn't support those relationships. with time and attention. So perhaps this is another approach to finding the work that you want to do. Instead of, well, look for your passion, okay? Look for the point, and I'm not saying passion has nothing to do with it. I'm just saying that passion is terribly difficult to identify. But it is perhaps true that some people's passion helps them override the pain. You know, physical demanding areas, right? They tend to get adrenaline going that helps them overcome fear and to some degree pain. And they know how to do that. They're open to that. That both the athletes and the leaders, athletes or soldiers and the leaders, are open to utilizing this adrenaline piece to move things along. And they get good at it. Okay. It's never something that I've wanted to be a part of, particularly. And so, at the end of the day, maybe take a look at this. And I hope that these 4 different lenses will help you determine, the kinds of things that suit you best from a mental perspective and suit your strengths. I think it's a real strength to be able to go through something and then turn it into something that others can use. Okay. So that's why I wanted to break it down, and I wanted to put that in your hands, and I hope that helps. So we'll just do a quick conclusion. As we've explored today, the simple phrase, work hard, is anything but simple. It's not this monolithic concept, and it certainly isn't automatically equated with any sort of a white knuckle, gritted teeth, brute force method of sacrificing everything for these intense long hours. We know this from people that cognitively train, great musicians, chess players. Instead, we see that hard work comes in different flavors. It can be physically demanding. It can be about enduring long, difficult routines, sacrificing relationships. It can be cognitively challenging, like learning, or it can be profoundly emotionally taxing, like therapy. All of these different flavors are underpinned by a certain level of grit and persistence. But I believe the largest insight from this discussion is the idea that we each have an innate capacity or preference for dealing with certain kinds of pain or struggle. And understanding which kind of hard work resonates with you, or which you're best suited to, I'm going to say, endure. I think that's critical for finding your path and your own vision of success. So this thinking allows us to move beyond a simplistic, often damaging narrative that you've got to inflict loneliness on yourself and damage relationships and abandon people near and dear to you in order to become successful. Now, there are some people that are able to make agreements to navigate these periods. For others, the partner feels trapped. The other in the relationship feels like they're being damaged. Now, and again, just in summary, to younger folks or those guiding them, find your passion can be misleading because it's hard to detect passion and it's easy to invent passion. So perhaps this is a different approach, is to say, okay, well, let's sample these different, again, the metaphor is different kinds of pain, kinds of struggle, and see which one doesn't hurt or doesn't hurt so bad. So instead of looking for this elusive passion idea, it might just be more productive to understand what challenges you're willing and able to embrace on a consistent basis, which of these pains you're best able to put up with. So I'm reflecting on these different dimensions of hard work and trying to use it in my own business to decide the things I should be doing and the things I probably shouldn't be doing. And I think, as we mull over this, I think it's a concept that's worth putting into your mental toolbox. So I'll leave it there for now.
This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do Busy Right.